Today we're going to be talking about Screamer, a new arcade-style racing game made by the developers behind the latest Hot Wheels Unleashed series. Something I didn't know until I started writing the review is that Screamer is actually a reboot of an old series of racing games from the late 90s. I'd be interested to know if anyone actually remembers them. So I've given this game about 14 hours, give or take, and I think the word that would best describe the entire experience I had playing this game was unconventional. Screamer is a very strange game. So let's get into it. So as you can probably tell by looking at Screamer, this game has a very arcade style feeling to the gameplay, but it is deceptively hard, mainly due to the drift mechanic of the game. Instead of other races where drift gets activated by tapping the brake or pressing a dedicated button, drifting in this game is controlled by your right analog stick, while also steering with the left analog stick, which is super weird. It took me a very long time to get adjusted to it. This also isn't helped by the story making you jump between characters a lot, all of which have cars that control and handle a lot differently from each other. Getting the hang of the way drifting and steering works in the game is probably the biggest barrier of difficulty the game has, because it is so different to what I'm used to, and I often found myself fighting my racing game instincts for a lot of the game, which I feel like the game is very well aware of because throughout the story it is pretty slow to drip feed new features and mechanics to the game. For the first 3 hours or so, you are given the basic controls, the active, shifting, and boost mechanics to learn. The active shifting is weird. It's like playing the game on half manual or half automatic, I guess. You're able to shift gears up, but only when you hit the small window which will give you a small boost as well as fill up your boost meter, but the game will automatically shift you down gears when you slow down. Boost is filled up by driving well, but also mostly by hitting the active shifting, as well as filled up by driving at the limit on your highest gear. Eventually throughout the story you get to unlock takedowns, which give you the ability to destroy other drivers, shielding, which protects you from other drivers taking you down, overdrive, which is a major special boost mode. Then all the characters in the game each have their own unique abilities on top of that. Each of these mechanics on their own work well, but when they are stacked up on top of each other they can quickly become overwhelming. And I think that's why the game takes its time introducing all of these things throughout the story, as it can be overwhelming, and it's hard to ever get comfortable with this game. But it does still feel like it's a bit too slow at doing so. At 7 hours into the game, I don't think half of the characters had revealed their abilities yet, and I think there's kind of a reason for that, which I'll circle back around to when I talk about the story. The gameplay at a base level, it works, it's unique, and it is really fun, but unfortunately the difficulty scaling of the campaign is all over the place. Some races are incredibly difficult while others are just way too easy, and it's kind of a crapshoot on which will be which. There was one race in particular that I had to actually lower the difficulty down to beat it early on in the game, only for nothing else in the story to give me as much of a challenge from there on onwards. And that could just be me getting better at the game or discovering that a lot of racetracks have pretty overpowered shortcuts, but also I feel like it's because the game has a hard time managing to keep a hold of difficulty as it piles on the new and different mechanics of the game. And I felt like I got through the game with not too much trouble while driving like an absolute maniac, which I feel like I probably shouldn't have been able to do. Moving on to the story, the main campaign of Screamers sees 5 teams of 3 people entering a quote-unquote illegal racing tournament with a grand prize of $100 billion, which even for like a dystopian future that seems like an insane amount of inflation to get to that point, it's almost too hard to get an idea on if that's meant to be, a lot of money or not. Regardless, the story follows each of these 5 teams and their individual reasons for joining. We have a team filled with ex-private military out for revenge, some people from a Yakuza crime family out to pay a debt, a bunch of scientists out to steal the secrets behind the tech used in the tournament, an heir to a corpo family out to prove himself, and then there's a pop star band because why not? The story is told to us through a mixture of cutscenes and visual novel elements. I think the cutscenes are very well done, but the game does front load the story with them, and then afterwards they'll only show up sporadically until the end, where the ending is also backloaded with them. Which is a shame because I think they look fantastic and there is some great and creative animation going on, and when these cutscenes are on display, it is when the story feels the most realised and effective at what it does. The story is also completely voice acted. I love the designs of all the characters, they are very unique and fun, and a thing that helps them stand out is that they all speak in their native languages. So you will hear a variety of English, French, German, and Japanese. Probably a couple more in there, but I'm not confident in picking them out. And I can see this being kind of jarring, but personally I love it. But my main problem with the story is that the majority of it is told to us through a visual novel. For one, the characters during the visual novel have very little facial expressions or alternate poses, so a lot of the emotion of the story is lost, but also the visual novel really fucks with the pacing of the game. If you're playing through the story, you get one race, then story, then another race, then story, and it is very stop-start, it doesn't work very well together. The visual novel feels too constraining as a narrative device for the story it's trying to tell, especially the way that they're doing it. I know visual novels can tell very effective stories, but the way that Screamer utilizes it doesn't work for me for the most part. And because there are so many characters in the story, the game drops the ball in trying to carry all of the different plot lines and the characters within them. So many characters get shafted or they just disappear for ages. The main campaign of the game lasts about 12 hours, give or take, and there are so many characters in the story that just do nothing for the vast majority of the game, while some of the other main characters just repeat arguments and plot points over and over. You know, I like the dialogue for the most part, but the actual story that Screamer tries to tell falls flat a lot of the time because it drags out the plot, drags out conflicts, and then rushes the ending. A significant amount of time is spent on a lot of the individual characters awakening their special skills throughout the story, which comes along with some kind of self-revelation, a lot of which is barely set up or doesn't really matter in the long run. But it stretches out the story too long and the gameplay kind of suffers because of it. It's just a lot of the same stuff over and over. Like the 10th time I have to play a character who is awakening their skill at the same time as having, a personal revelation was probably my limit, but there's like 15 characters in the game. Also, the game's final act is just a complete mess, but it does have the advantage of actually doing something with the story and being pretty entertaining with its almost nonsensical plot twist. And I felt like I was enjoying the story the most at the end because it was just so fun and over-exaggerated and weird. And when the game was leaning into that is when it was feeling the most effective. I get the feeling that the visual novel probably wasn't the intended way to tell the game because there is just a lot of talent and effort, or at least interesting ideas, put into every part of the game except for the visual novel style of storytelling. Even the voice acting is interesting, presentation sucks, and the pacing is just all over the show. This feels like a budget compromise, but I can't say that for sure. As for the other things that this game has to offer, there is multiplayer, which you can play split screen or play online. I tried online, but unfortunately, as I am from Australia, I am geographically impaired and matchmaking wasn't much of an option due to the insane amount of lag. I gave it a try, it's not playable. So if you live in a low population country, you'll probably just have to stick with playing with friends or playing offline. Offline options are just, the regular races, time trials, all the stuff that you'd expect in a game like this. There is also car customization in the game, and as you play through the story or play, normal races and stuff, you unlock cosmetics that can change how every character's car looks in the game. It is purely cosmetic, and the ways you change the car are purely tied to what you unlock. So there isn't a crazy amount of control, but I wouldn't say it's bad though, but it does feel like it could use some work. The music in Screamer is mostly EDM, some of it is more metal-ish and some of it is more drum and bass. The soundtrack has a few different credited artists according to Spotify, and I kind of gravitated towards liking the music by Hex Archive more than the others, but seriously, it's all great. The majority of the racing tracks definitely fit the over-exaggerated vibe of the racing in the game pretty well. But because there are so many races in the game, you should definitely expect to hear a few of them more than you'd actually like to. But overall, it is a well put together soundtrack and I enjoyed it. So I'm not too much of a car guy, so I decided to stream some of this game to my friend over Discord to see if he thought the car sounds sounded genuine. And he thinks that they sounded great, or as good as they could, considering all of the extra nonsense going on in the game. But he did point out that the cars hitting limiter so fast and changing gears sounds a bit goofy because of how quickly they do it. He was particularly horrified at the control scheme of the game, but what does he know? He's only drifted cars in the real world. And he also pointed out to me that a lot of the cars in the game had a lot of work and thought put into their designs. He's a big car buff, so I'm just going to take his word for it. Moving on to performance, this game runs very well with all the settings on high. The game ran at a fairly stable to 80 to 90 FPS throughout the entire run on 1440p. For it being on Unreal Engine and for how good the game looks, I am pretty satisfied with the performance for the most part. There were some small issues with texture pop-ins on certain tracks and a little slowdown when there were races with a lot of players on screen, but this was super uncommon and not game ruining or immersion breaking. As for bugs, also just very minor things. The physics can do some strange things. If you hit a wall at a weird angle or too fast, it'll spin you out in a strange way. It happened a few times to me, but whenever it did, I probably deserved to be punished for what I was doing. It just looked a little weird. Moving on to the art style, I think the art style overall is pretty fantastic during the racing. The cars look good, the tracks look great, the weather and lighting can often look gorgeous. I'm always a fan of when a game can pull off the heavy orange sunset look. I know some people might think it's a bit overbearing, but honestly, I love it when a game pulls off something like this. I think the game could have used a little bit more visual flair when it came to the cars, kind of like with Need for Speed Unbound, how the cars would have all of those comic style effects coming off them throughout the race. I think Screamer could definitely have used a bit more of kind of that, because mostly all the game has to offer when it comes to the cars and the flair off of them is when the players enter overdrive. I think it definitely would have been cool just to see a little bit more done here. But overall, the game looks fantastic. I don't have many notes, except for the visual novel elements, but we already talked about that. So, editor me here. Usually when I play a game on the Steam Deck, I like to collect footage for it just to show you how it plays and how it looks. When I went to collect footage for Screamer on Steam Deck, the game just wouldn't launch. I don't know why. I spent about 15 minutes trying to fix that so I could, collect footage for the game. It wouldn't launch. So that's why you're not seeing it here. Not that I recommend you play the game on Steam Deck anyway. Alright, so I took a look at this game on the Steam Deck, and the game is technically playable on the deck. I wouldn't recommend it. The graphics need to be turned down to make the game ugly to play it on a consistent FPS. I did about 5 minutes of graphics tuning, and I could not get it to run well and look good. There is a fair bit of visual clarity lost on the deck, which makes it extremely hard to see corners coming and driving. This game is pretty on the big screen, and I think you'd be doing a massive disservice playing it on the Steam Deck. Overall, Screamer is one of the most unique racing games I've played, for good and bad. The racing mechanics are strange and very hard to get used to, but the satisfaction of mastering, or at the very least getting a clean drift off, is worth learning it for. Visual novel story, while I kind of shat on it, it does have its moments, but the game is better when it sticks to the cutscenes, and even if I didn't mind the dialogue, the story writing and presentation brings the game to a standstill and pacing which just does not suit a racing game. That being said, I appreciate that they went through the effort of having the entire thing voiced, and the clash of the various accents and languages is pretty fun, though I could see people finding it a bit jarring. Again, it does feel like there was probably more planned here. You don't go through the effort to design all of these different characters, give them all unique cars, and then do this with the majority of the story. But the gameplay is solid, it runs well, and the music slaps. The game is currently available on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series S and X, and PC via Steam or Epic Games for around $59.99 USD or $89.95 Australian. The price tag does make this a bit more difficult to recommend. I think there is a specific niche of people that will really love this game, and I suspect if you've gotten to this point and liked what you've seen, story included, then I say go for it. Personally, I liked it. It's flawed and a little messy, which is why I think the asking price is just a little bit too much. But I guess playing this game for, 12 to 14 hours is cheaper than filling up a tank of fuel for my car. I don't know if that's a helpful metric. So I do think this is one that you should pick up on sale. And I definitely do not recommend getting a deluxe version of the game. It only really includes a few design and livery changes for the cars, which I don't feel like is worth the extra money. There was 3 days early access to the game, which came with the deluxe version, which by the time of this review coming out, it certainly isn't worth having. Screamer takes some pretty wild swings, and I can see it being a little polarizing because of it. But it's been a while since I've played a racer that feels this different to play. Just a weird game, and I kind of love it for it. So that is all I have to say. So thank you so much for watching, and if you made it this far, please leave a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks again to my YouTube members for the continued support, always appreciated, and I will see you all soon.